at all. We want to go ahead and get started here. If we can go ahead and take our seats. Excellent. Well done. Okay, thank you again for being here tonight for our next round of exciting conversation. To start, I wanted to actually bring Alejandro up to let us know about the interpretation services.
Buenas tardes, yo soy intérprete de español, así que si hay alguien que necesite auriculares, me avisan, por favor, yo voy a estar atrás.
Excellent. Thank you, Alejandro. So here is our agenda for tonight's meeting. We're going to start by going, like we always do, by approving the minutes from the last meeting from March 11th. Can I get an approval in a second? Anyone?
Motion to approve.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Second.
Great. All right, on we go. So as we typically do, we're going to go really quickly through group agreements, which again, you've all been great about. We're going to have a few different presentations tonight. One on the DSAP process, the Deer Dawn Station Area Plan. We'll get an update from Google and where they are, and then we'll also be talking about the Deer Dawn Integrated Station Concept Plan. So we have quite a bit to go through, and we're going to leave plenty of room to have discussion with you all, and we'll, as always, have public comment as well. So please go ahead and fill out those comment cards. Meeting objectives, just real quick, is to learn a little bit about what the anticipated process to amend the DSAP and review the mixed-use development proposal by Google. So just to kind of continue to build an understanding of that process and how it integrates. We'll learn progress about the DISC, as I just mentioned, give feedback. We're going to go over the possible layouts and different elements, and we definitely want to get your feedback on that. And then again, we'll hear from the public. So group agreements, we've gone through this many times, but really just be respectful as you always are. Let's not talk over each other. Always put yourself in each other's shoes and different perspectives, and we really want to maintain that safe space, and we really would love to hear from you all. So if we can just be open and friendly as we always are, and as always, have a good time. That's key. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lori. Just real quick, as an intro to this, we're going to have, again, an overview introduction. We're going to have information about the DSAP, a little bit about community engagement, also some information about Google and the mixed use update and just generally kind of how all that integrates. They're different processes, but there's a lot of similarities. So I'm going to ask that we hold comments until the end of that presentation, and we're going to have a discussion with you all then. So with that, you're on.
All right, so I'm just going to go through a couple slides really quickly to just set the stage and remind everyone of how far we've come and what the background has been for the Deer Dawn Station Area Planning. So the Good Neighbor Committee, which I know several of you were on, began in 2009, and the city also conducted other public outreach during the 2009-2010 timeframe. And so that culminated in adopting the Deer Dawn Station Area Plan in 2014. And then in 2017, the city signed an exclusive negotiation agreement with Google for the sale of about 21 acres of land near the station. So following that, the city initiated this group, the Station Area Advisory Group. And so in 2018, we conducted a community engagement process that resulted in a series of desired outcomes that really set forth the community priorities around a potential Google development, but also the Deer Dawn Station area more broadly. And so 2018 ended with a city council meeting where they approved the memorandum of understanding with Google, as well as the land sale and the option agreement for the ABC lot next to the arena. And so 2019 has really been about ramping up. Google began preparation of a mixed-use plan, and the city has been preparing for an amendment process for the Deer Dawn Station Area Plan. So next, Rosalind will go through that process that we're anticipating to begin here.
Well, good evening. Again, I'm Rosalind Huey. I'm the director for the Department of Planning, Building, and Code Enforcement with the City of San Jose. Very glad to be with you this evening to share with you about what we anticipate for the Diridon Station Area Plan amendment process. And actually, before I get started, because clearly there are many, many staff members within my department and really across several other city departments who are going to be involved in this process. And I would just want to take a moment to introduce actually a new member of our planning team, Robert Manford, who is over here. He can raise his hand. So Robert Manford has been with our planning department for about 6 months. He comes to us from the city of Los Angeles, and he is serving as our deputy planning director and will be very involved throughout this process, particularly from the environmental review process. So you're going to be seeing lots of Robert. So again, just building upon the 2014 plan for the Diridon Station area, and really we see this as opportunity to really implement the guiding principles that we've always had for the Diridon area. And so we're just going to be building upon these guiding principles, or what I kind of consider as core values for the entire area. Obviously, you know, we have the opportunity to really create a new neighborhood district. It's going to be a major destination area, a place that has a new intermodal station. Again, the opportunity to build upon the existing transit services that are already provided there, in addition to adding the exciting new transit services that will be coming, so very exciting. And then with that, the opportunity really to see a significant development. So the opportunity for high-density land uses, and again, a mix of uses, and a place for many people to live and to work and to enjoy the area. And along those lines, we know how important the public spaces are in the public realm, and making sure that we have opportunities for placemaking and that we have respites for people to enjoy. So both passive type of activities and more active. And then lastly, again, the opportunity with this new neighborhood district really is to really reflect who we are here in San Jose, so the rich culture that we have, and really to include that spirit of innovation throughout the process. So what does the Diridon Station Area Plan cover? It covers a lot, actually. I'll go through these elements quickly, but obviously there's a big focus on land uses and where they're located. A focus on urban design, and again, those public spaces, the gathering spaces that are going to be so critical for the people living and working in the area. The station concept and how that is laid out, obviously transportation and connectivity, and how the area is going to work within the existing neighborhoods surrounding the area. Obviously, we know that parking, supply and demand is going to be a big item for the area, along with the other infrastructure needs. Affordable housing, we know, is very important. Again, part of the placemaking that includes public art and other opportunities for placemaking. Ensuring that we have really good quality design guidelines by which development proposals will be measured, and then how we can actually maximize the development potential in the area. So why the need to amend the DSAP? Well, there have been lots of changes, right, since 2014. And we now have an implementation partner to help us implement that vision from 2014. So, for example, we're no longer planning for a ballpark, so that's a big change in the plan. We now have the Diridon Integrated Station Concept Planning effort underway, and we want to incorporate that work. We have the implementation partner, Google, who is pursuing a mixed-use development within the station area. And just recently, the city completed the downtown airspace and development capacity study, which council approved earlier this year. So we now have the opportunity for higher heights in downtown and in the Diridon area. Council also approved last year Climate Smart San Jose. So this is a very ambitious planned strategy to be more environmentally friendly and sustainable throughout the city. And just very recently, the City Council actually adopted a set of new design guidelines for downtown, including the Diridon Station area. And then lastly, we're about to embark on a very important transportation plan for downtown. So what we expect to actually change in the station area plan, again, first and foremost, an opportunity for more development capacity to reflect the increase in heights. We'll be looking at land use designation changes. For example, I mentioned earlier the ballpark that's no longer being planned for. So with that land use, we'll look for that particular area, as well as other opportunities for land use designations to make sure that we really have the good mix of office development and housing opportunity and perhaps other uses as well. We're going to be revising some of the concepts around connectivity, infrastructure, transportation, and public spaces. So for example, we know how important that some of the gathering spaces are in the station area. So we're going to be looking at, where should those areas be best located. And we obviously want to refer to some of the new documents that have been recently approved. Again, the Downtown Design Guidelines, the DIS effort, the soon-to-be kicked-off transportation plan for downtown, and other studies and plans that are going to be underway. So in conjunction with the Diridon Station area plan process, we will be working on lots of other things, and all of this actually will be happening concurrently. So we actually received City Council direction to actually prepare a series of implementation plans for the Diridon area, and that includes a district parking plan, infrastructure financing plan, as well as an affordable housing plan. So that work will be underway. Obviously, the city will be processing and reviewing Google's mixed-use plan along with the development agreement, which would include the community benefits plan. And then also we anticipate that there'll be other property owners who will be submitting their development applications to the city, and obviously we'll be processing those as well. So when we look at the actions that the City Council will be taking, so from the city side, again, the city will be initiating amendments to the Diridon area. And so obviously we know that Google will have ideas for their mixed use project and will be likely submitting amendments to the Diridon area. The city will be looking at the Diridon area from a very comprehensive approach and making sure that we have an appropriate amendment for the non-Google owned lands. We anticipate that will also include general plan amendments, as well as the 3 implementation plans that I referenced earlier. So on the Google side, obviously the city will be processing their entitlements, and the council will be taking actions such as the DSAP amendments and other entitlement actions such as a rezoning. And then obviously the city council will be taking action on the development agreement, which includes the community benefits plan. And obviously with all of this work, the environmental clearance process is a huge piece of it. And so we will be undertaking that environmental analysis both on the city side, so all of the city initiated work, as well as for the Google mixed use development project. So in terms of timeline, here is a really good representation. You'll see the 3 components. So for the Diridon Station area plan itself, the Google mixed use development project, the development agreement, We see all of this work, again, happening concurrently, and throughout this entire process, there'll be continued community engagement. We know how important that is, and we see the opportunity to really do a lot of joint community engagement throughout the entire process. So this will be happening throughout the remaining of this year, and concluding, we anticipate, by the end of 2020. And then you'll see on the right in terms of final decision making. So all of these plans, documents, actions, they'll be going to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission will be making a recommendation to the City Council, and then with final action by the City Council.
So I'm just going to elaborate more on that bottom bar, the community engagement. So the MOU and City Council collectively give direction on some things that they would like to see in terms of community engagement. And so this would supplement what the city normally does with a development project. So at a minimum, this is going to include periodic reports to this group to share information and get feedback. Last time we said we're looking at every 3 to 4 months, but we're thinking it might be a little more frequent, 2 to 4, moving forward. At least one of these meetings we will be presenting to you and getting feedback on the draft development agreement before that goes to City Council. And then, similar to the engagement process we did last year, we're also going to be using a variety of other methods to involve the broader public. So that would involve workshops, online tools, and pop-ups, things like that. So this is our tentative thinking. It's preliminary right now, but we wanted to just give you a flavor of what this could look like in terms of the number of outreach rounds. So we're thinking about 3. Starting with a kickoff round to present the project description and do their environmental review scoping and provide an overview of the process. The next round would be more focused on specific topics like land use, transportation, public space. And then the third round would be the actual plans themselves, so the complete set of DSAP amendments and the plans for Google, the draft development agreement, and the environmental documents. So the engagement process will really build upon the past. And so I started this presentation by going over quickly what those different milestones were. So in the past, the Good Neighbor Committee and other public outreach drove the development of the Diridon Station Area Plan. And a few years later, we did the engagement process, and those desired outcomes are directly reflected in the report that summarized all of the activities, but also in the MOU. And so the MOU really becomes the foundation for work moving forward. It includes the guiding principles and shared goals for the development. And so I hope you will all take a look at that again. We provided the MOU in your packet. We also provided you some a one-page memo on the additional City Council direction that was given at the December 4th meeting that was not directly reflected in the final MOU, but it's still important direction for staff and Google to be keeping in mind moving forward. And so we've taken that foundation and begun to work on some preliminary concepts. Rosalind went over the anticipated changes that we'll be looking at for the Diridon Station Area Plan. And you'll hear soon, next up from Google in terms of their early thinking, the process around developing some preliminary concepts. So later this year, we'll be doing some outreach related to those preliminary concepts. And that will directly inform Google's application. And so once that application gets into the city, it'll formally launch this process that Rosalind went over, and we will do the 3 rounds of engagement, or about 3 rounds of engagement that I just described. And so that process will then inform ultimately the set of council decisions. So hopefully, this diagram is really just meant to show that we have these engagement processes that directly feed into these milestones along the top there. So I also wanted to point out that we've included a set of FAQs in your packet. This has been updated from the last round of FAQs that are on the web. And so all of these materials have been posted to deerdonsj.org for the public as well. So the process will build upon the past, and it will also coordinate with other plans. And so the next agenda item after you hear from Google will be on the concept plan, and you've already heard updates on this a couple times. So this is not new news, but just to remind you that right now we're in phase 1 of the concept plan, and the outcome of that will be determining a layout for the station and track alignments and track crossings. And so it'll be, we'll continue work on that layout and refining and optimizing that into phase 2. And also in phase 2 of the concept plan, the team will be working on a program delivery framework, so the organizational component of that. Throughout this time, the concept plan team will continue to coordinate with the city processes related to the Diridon Station area. So of course we have the Diridon Station area plan and the amendments and the Google development that's a part of that. There's also the downtown transportation plan. So you can see there's a lot of overlap in terms of topics: access, parking, urban integration, things like public spaces. So these processes will all be happening over the next couple years and concurrently, really having to talk to each other and coordinate to be consistent. So this diagram here shows how the DSAP and Diridon Station Area Plan and the Google project, those were the timelines you saw earlier. And layered on here is the concept plan and downtown transportation plan. So we're in phase 1 now of the concept plan while we're working on these, ramping up for these efforts. And then later this year, these things will begin. And so it seems like a lot is going on, and it is, but it's actually aligning very well to be able to have these planning processes happen concurrently and start to really gel and coalesce around the same concepts. So with that, I will turn it over to Google. So we have Joe Van Bellingham, Alexa Arena, and Rebecca Prozen.
Hi, I'm Joe Van Bellingham, Senior Director of Development for Google. It's been a while since I've been back here. I just want to reiterate a few things I talked about in my first meeting was, we're really focused on creating the right kind of place, and place isn't just about the physical things and buildings. It's about really trying to design for those, urban experiences that people crave, and how do you program these places, and how do you create a sense of community. And that our approach to this is really around how do you balance the needs of the community, the needs of the environment, how do you create economically replicable solutions, enhance the economic well-being of the community, all through a lens of innovation. And of course, rooted in a deep understanding of the community and its context. So we've been spending a lot of time listening. We've participated in about 150 hours of city-led community meetings, as well as, over 30 community meetings. I personally enjoyed the community walks the most. I really learned a lot about the community, and I can honestly say that our team those have been very informative to the thinking around the project, and has changed our opinion on several things. And we're really convinced that collectively we can all come up with solutions where the community and Google can thrive together. It's also impacted the makeup of our team, of how do we collect a diverse set of thinkers of how to address the things we heard. So on that note, I want to just introduce a few team members. At the far end there is Marla, who's joined the SAG team. Bhavesh, are you here? Oh, right back here. So Bhavesh will be focused on workplace design. Ricardo is, many of you probably have met through the community walks. And I'm very happy to announce our new addition to the team who joined in January, Alexa Arena. So Alexa and I have worked together in the past. I really admire her work. She's got a deep experience around place creation, but more importantly, she has a deep passion and a deep thinker around social infrastructure. And we all know that that's an important thing that we got to get right in this development. And very excited about having her here. She has significant experience of projects of scale, including Pier 70, and she was the head of development on the West Coast for Lend-Lease. So I'm going to turn it over to her now, and she can walk through the presentation.
Thank you. It's really great to be here. I feel like I know you all in a way because I've had the pleasure of watching a lot of videos and getting up to speed on the content of some great work over the past couple of years, and it was part of what really inspired me to come and take the job and to work on this project. So I think it's got this great potential to really be an outstanding public-private partnership. So really happy to be here. So I'm going to jump right in a bit. We've, since January and since the MOU was adopted, we've really geared up to try to think about how we can build the right team to bring things from the vision of the MOU over to action. And so that's included a broadening team, which some of whom are here today, some of whom are consultants and a broader level of expertise around both urban planning, but also how we build out the place and the social infrastructure pieces, which I'll touch on a little bit. And a lot of our work so far has been about really learning our context, because obviously Great Place is 100% rooted in context and the history of where you are and the place you are. So that starts with the Memorandum of Understanding, which I have to say is just this incredibly inspirational document from my end, in the sense that it hits on so many critical themes about what San Jose and cities need to think about in great public-private partnerships to really get it done right. And it goes well beyond, as Joe had mentioned, physical spaces and into what are the things that keep culture and retain the best of cities and help everyone grow as cities grow with it. So we've rooted ourselves very much in that MOU and very much in the planning documents that have taken place before us, which obviously the downtown design guidelines represent a recent version of, as do the Dear Dawn Station Area Plan, the SAG report, and all of them are hitting on a really strong desire to create a great public realm and a great sense of a culture and vibrant life where this becomes a place where everyone wants to go to and can experience. Likewise, it's very much rooted in the context of so many different elements. When you're working at this scale and thinking about how can I create the right type of mixed-use plan, there's everything from the technicality of site and site constraints, of place and the context and the nature of the environment of you're around, of community, of both the positive sides of community and some of the areas where we really need to pay strong attention to, like areas of homelessness around the site, that I think we can have a strong sense of leadership on how the project can help really get ahead of and lean into. And also of the policy around us, of how the city is advancing in so many different ways, and how can we reflect that within the place, as well as creating, as Joe referenced, an economically viable project. So really, it's exciting to us to think about how all those pieces can orchestrate and come together in a complex way. It takes a bit of time, and that was partly the time we've been spending to really get geared up on a lot of that input. And ultimately it has to be underpinned by, you've heard us say, social infrastructure a couple of times, which is really trying to say it's more than about buildings. When you go to a place, you don't experience the buildings, you experience the interactions with people and social life around you and the fundamentals of what builds that community up. And so those are things like libraries and schools and great open spaces and great opportunities and to be part of the development and what it's in the city at large. So we're going to spend a lot of time on that, and I think that becomes a rooting to how we think about the plan beyond just the physical. But I'm also going to bring you through a few slides on how we think about the physicality principally in order to really make sure that's embedded in correctly. And first and foremost, this is a diagram you saw a couple of SAG meetings ago, and it's about enhancing real connections. And that's the really special part of this site, is that it is at the nexus of incredible transit, incredible natural infrastructure, and a really diverse and vibrant set of communities around us. And so there's so much opportunity here to connect in and to grow from our context. And the key and principle to that, the strongest adjacencies that are direct within the site are the rail station and how that matures, which obviously we're very active in with the DISC process, sorting out how that can work in the future and how it can work in its present state. The SAB Center, which has brought an enormous amount of activity and liveliness to the area, in which we want to make sure the plan supports and responds to. And what is a pretty incredible social infrastructure piece in and of itself in the nature and the creek and the river and how that comes together. Obviously, San Jose's thought so much about this resource for what it means to the city overall, and we really want to slide into that and fit this piece of that infrastructure in a way that really can bring it alive and connect it to the broader city at large. And then we really are approaching this with a set of strong principles of how do we think about this, not as a regional destination, but as a really something that's very rooted in localism. How do we make sure small businesses, existing businesses are part of this development and its growth? How can we amplify the best of what San Jose is all about and create a really vibrant, social, welcoming environment through our streets, through our programming, through what we're supporting through our social infrastructure? And how can that become the basis? So this is really of design. So it's a really trying to flip from a building first design of thinking of, you know, what kind of floor plates do we need, to a people first design of what is that we're really trying to get to, and what kind of outcomes are we trying to drive in that civic life? And then how does that inform plan? So hopefully you'll see that in the coming work from us as we advance the plan, because that's really our strong intent. And to do that, we have to really keep learning and keep reflecting with you all and with people in the community to then understand how best to bring that in and to make it come alive. Ultimately, San Jose is this incredible, diverse, culture-rich place of creators and innovators with great history to it. We decided to come to San Jose because we very much want to be part of the city. We are not here to build a campus in the city. We are here to join that city and to think about how we can bring this part of the city into its next generation, taking that ethos into it. So we take that very seriously. And that somewhat relates to the process we're going to go through. And so part of this was inviting you to kind of help us understand that process and give us advice on the types of ways we should best do that, because the process is getting that right is really going to tell us what type of, is really going to drive that outcome. And there's 3 different ways we think about that at this stage. The first is advisory, which you all are a key part of. Everything that we sort of start to think through and incubate, we're going to use you all as a sounding board for us of, is this the right direction? It's a great group of people that we can really learn a lot from, and we want to do that with you through the journey. There's also the side of place creation, which we could also talk about vis-a-vis that social infrastructure. And that's really thinking through deep partnerships. We can't do this alone. So we have to partner with neighborhood stakeholders, with arts organizations, with local businesses, with nonprofits that are doing incredible work that have the capacity to grow as we grow, and then we can help support in that growth in order to have the right type of opportunity pathways into the project. And so we're going to do some very deep topic-based discussions around that with some of those groups over the coming months. and also experience feedback. We want to make sure that what we are delivering by way of the civic realm is a place people, San Joseans, want to go to. And so we need to get in your head a little bit more and also just really deeply understand what that looks like. And a lot of that outreach comes in maybe different forms than this type of forum, which is hard for certain types of people to engage in. So it's really about having open houses and going to different neighborhoods and communities and kind of getting out there and getting feedback where people are, which we will do over the course of the next 3 to 6 months as well as we build up the plan. So all of that kind of coalesces to the idea of a really strong public-private partnership, which again is really the exciting part for us about this project, and I think something that you all have co-created and that culminated in the MOU, which is way more than just about design, but is really about how can we partner together to find the right programs, to find the right co-creators in order to create what can be a really great part of the city. So we really look forward to going on that journey with you, and we hope to use this as an invitation to have some further conversations with many of you, both individually, but also as a group, to give us feedback on how best to go through that. So hopefully this gave you some ideas of where our head is, and we look forward to doing a little Q&A. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd just like to reiterate too that we really want to be an extension of the city. This isn't about an office campus, and we've heard the community loud and clear about balancing the needs, and we know that we have to be a player in housing and affordability and all these important social infrastructure issues. We totally get the importance of the creek and what that could do to connect people to nature and preserve that resource. So we're listening, and we're very excited about entering this next phase of starting to share some real ideas as they start to get developed. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're going to roll right into the Q&A. I guess we don't want to, do we want to touch on this slide? Yeah, I thought there might be something missing.
Forgive me. So this is our schedule for the coming summer and beyond. It is touching on more from the EIR lens of the planning process, but simultaneous to this lens, we can go through how we believe we build up also the public benefits plan. So over the course of the summer, as I referenced, we'll go through a variety of community engagement activities. And that in the latter part of July or early August, we hope to come back to you all with some conceptual thinking that starts to almost on a zoning level, think through how do we get the right mixed use environment for the site and start to hone in on some of the major pieces that build up that social infrastructure piece. And that will then get refined as we get the feedback and come back as an iteration towards September, and as needed, kind of get further refined going into October/November, where we would then initiate our EIR process through a notice of preparation and scoping meeting. Once the plan is done, it also will help us create that benchmark and that financial analysis with the city around the valuation, which then leads to kind of that dollars and cents behind the public benefits and how it's scoped. But we still want to have some good active conversations around what are the key things from concept from the MOU over to action that we should consider as it relates to those public benefit pieces. And then it will take about a year to finish the EIR. Leading up to that fall 2020 date, there'll be obviously quite a bit of activity within that year where we're working through advancing the design into more specific, a phase one of kind of looking at what it could look like from more of a building perspective versus a planning perspective. And likewise, advancing, again, those public benefit agreements and what that looks like. And then after that, we also have this great opportunity because Google, there is a great benefit to Google not being more what you would see in a typical development world. You get through the process and it more ends there. we're in for the long haul. So we do want to find a process where it continues even after and as we're building and as we're operating to make sure we're really doing this right and we're in partnership for the long haul. So certainly this is just showing our pathway through approvals, but it will extend beyond this.
Thank you very much. And now we officially shift to the Q&A. I was told to remind you all, my name is Dave Javid from Plan to Place, a consultant working with the city. Sorry, forgot to say that earlier. So now we have a list of questions up here for you. I know that was a lot of information to absorb, but we want to just really understanding that all these different processes are very much interrelated, very much rooted in community values and community engagement. We want to get your input on the overall process, any questions you have, your thoughts on the community engagement. That's very important. If you give us feedback, what other type of engagement activities we might want to consider, and then anything else that you want us to consider. We have about 15 to 20 minutes for this item because there's a lot more to discuss. So if we can keep the questions or comments as brief as possible, I would greatly appreciate it, and then we'll get through this process. So just to remind you all again, I know it's been a little while, speak into your mics clearly, state your name, your organization. You already flipped your name tags over, so you're ready to roll, and we're going to start with Bill.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. If you could flip back to the slide with the schedule. Not necessary. One of the things that I think about before you get into an EIR process is that you have something that is a little more detailed about the plans. We haven't seen anything that's even like a massing plan yet. So when Google talks about not a campus, I really have no idea what to imagine. So that's a lot to happen before an EIR.
So that'll be the July and August, where we'll show over the course of July and August how we're thinking about street networks, how the blocks are forming, what are the elements of how the pieces like where's the retail going, where are the mix of uses going, how have we optimized that, how are the creek frontages working, what historic buildings are we keeping and not keeping. And so that is an intensive process we're going through, and obviously very much in line with talking through with the city in terms of coordinating with all the other processes they have going on. But that'll be to you in starting in late July through August, and then iterate over the fall based on the feedback.
Great, thank you. We're going to go to Jonathan and then to Harvey.
Okay, Jonathan Martinez, Georgetown and Cahill Homeowners Association, which is Ground Zero. Something to consider or try and find out. I mean, we all know about the Google buses leaving San Francisco. I assume a lot of your employees like living in San Francisco and commuting down to Mountain View. Do we have, or have you looked into how many people would actually, or do live in San Jose, commute up to Mountain View, and or may want to move closer to Ground Zero, and would they be renters or homeowners? That's something I would be really curious about, because you're talking about 20,000 employees. A lot of people coming into that neighborhood.
We don't have specific data that would give us sort of a quantitative number around that. What we imagine, I mean, what I think is really unique about the site itself is its access to transit. And so I think we're working on our mobility plan as well to just answer that front end of the question. I think the way people get to work will be really different than, for instance, in Mountain View and Sunnyvale because of that access to transit. But we don't have a strong lens at the moment, like data that starts to imply to us how many people are going to move close to work and move in the micro area. What's that going to do to, is it going to be for sale or are they going to try to buy something or rent something? Unless there's some work beyond that, I don't know. But it's an interesting question and something we can think through how to conceptually try to understand.
And on a broader sense, you still have Adobe moving in with one more tower, and then you've got PricewaterhouseCooper and other ventures that are moving into downtown San Jose because of this project. So it's just something I want to be considered.
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, we're going to go to Harvey and then to Teresa after that.
I want to give you a great kudos. I was up at your campus today for the EGRET office hours. For those of you who haven't been up to their campus in Mountain View, they have one of the main EGRET rookeries in the Bay Area is on their campus. And rather than let the cars go by during this 5-month mating season, they close off a street, and it's pedestrian only and pedestrian bikes. It's a great thing, and the Audubon Society goes out on Wednesdays at 11:30 for you to enjoy it. So that's the first thing. Second thing, the 10-ton elephant in the room is you're going to put more pressure on gentrification and housing prices. So I want to know what you're doing to get ahead of that so that we don't increase the amount of homelessness that we already have a significant amount in the area of the campus that you're proposing.
I think that's a very critical issue that we are absolutely looking at. And then we're trying to do that in a few different ways. First off, you know, the city is doing the housing study to try to understand that citywide. That's going to inform us a lot on how we should respond through the site and what is it that our site can do to contribute to that broader strategy. Because I think there's a problem there that we really need to lean into together that's even broader than the site itself, that really needs to be addressed. And so, but we're very much interested in finding the right models of how we can address homelessness and affordability in housing in the right way for the site. So it's certainly something we imagining and advancing along with the city and really respect that it's something we need to double down on.
So I'd like a commitment from you to make sure that you use some of your private monies and to help us advance beyond what we're capable of in the community.
I think, too, it's important to think of housing regionally. So if you look at Mountain View, you know, we advocated for thousands of units to be built in North Bayshore, and we put a project up in Mountain View as well, and we're working through the city to get the approvals on that for thousands of units. We're also fighting the same good fight in Sunnyvale to have that office park include housing as well, and we see San Jose as another piece of that puzzle. On homelessness, we've given almost $9 million since I'm not remembering the year, $9 million in homelessness programs specifically for San Jose, 12 million in Mountain View. There's a larger regional number where the number is escaping me, but we're going to continue to invest in the nonprofits that are doing the great work so that we can help, because we really understand that this is something that we're all going to have to roll up our sleeves and work on together.
And I do think, so there's two mechanisms. There is Google and what Google can give. There's also things like commercial assessment fees, which we've been supportive of and agree that office needs to pay a fee to help to create more affordability in housing and address some of the homelessness problems. So we're committed on both ends.
Great, thank you. Teresa,
Thank you.
you're next, and then Kevin.
Yeah, Alexa, great to have you join a really engaged team
Teresa,
and to
name
be
and
here
organization,
tonight.
Please, sorry. Name and
Pardon?
organization, just to
Teresa Alvarado Whisper. I apologize. You all have been very involved in this process, and I really appreciate that. What we're hearing tonight, you know, we heard from Rosalind and Lori earlier talking about the various city plans that are underway, and I think we're going to be hearing from Liz Scanlon and the ABC team talking about the DISC processes underway. You know, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg because there are so many pieces of this incredible puzzle that have to be addressed, and one of the most important really is addressing the rail alignment first and making sure we get that right and those public investments working in a seamless way. So how do you guys approach, and you're getting tons of feedback over the last year. I mean, you've probably heard from everybody and you have a giant long wish list of things. So how are those being vetted, and how will that, you know, how does that then get reflected into your mixed use plan?
Yeah, and I think actually the DISC process, I mean, you'll hear a bit more about it next, but is at a really great time to then come together with the mixed use plan process, and that's exactly what we're doing. And because it's gone through just this very robust process of really understanding, and it's still iterating, but all the technical work, which then informs for us how do we come together with it, and then kind of push and pull between the two in order to find the right solution. So we look forward to doing that over the summer, and we feel like it is the right time for those two pieces to come together more specifically. And of course, there's so much feedback and so many great existing, frankly, we don't want to recreate a lot of the great conversation that's already happened. And so whether it's the SOG report, the MOU, the great report that Silicon Valley Rising has done, there's so many pieces that we want to then say, how do we dig deeper from this as a basis to figure out what our real executable public benefit strategy is for this site. And so I think that's the type of conversations we want to have with members of the SOG and with broader members of the public and community groups in the next phase.
Great, thank you. Kevin, if you don't mind, I'm going to go to Nadia next. She had her card up first, and I'll come back to you.
Hi, Nadia Aziz with the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley. I have two questions. One's for the city. There was nothing I saw in there about SAG commenting or providing feedback on the community development plan. That's part of the development agreement. So if you could speak to what the process will be for that. And my second question is for both Google and the city. As I see there's community engagement happening this summer, which is like right around the corner. For whatever you think about what happened at the city council meeting, there was a lot of community members who felt like they were unheard by both the city and the Google. So what are you both planning on doing on addressing those parts of the community that felt unheard?
So maybe I can take the first question. I'm Kim Wallish, Deputy City Manager. One of the things we provided to you was a piece called the City Council Direction from the December 4th, 2018 council meeting. I think those of you that were tracking it, it was a very long, kind of complex set of recommendations. And so just want everybody to know that one of the specific directions from council was, this is at top of page 2 of that handout, reconvene the station area advisory group to discuss and provide feedback in a public forum on the final recommended community benefits and development agreement prior to any council decision. So we had clear direction to bring what we negotiate and agree to and are recommending first to the SAG before it goes to Planning Commission and then to council. So that would happen, second half of 2020.
And on the community engagement piece, I'm pinch hitting for Javier Gonzalez, who's out of town, but I think you're shaking your head because you probably know him. If you need to reach out to him to schedule a meeting, you should do so, and that's an open invitation to anyone on this committee.
Yeah, and obviously to Ricardo as well, but I think we also plan on absolutely going out and starting conversations, and this is a forum in which I feel we can gain feedback either through this venue, or you can come and talk to us about, look, I hear what you're doing, but I think you should also be doing these types of events, like whether it's reaching out to schools and trying to figure out how can we get people's voices heard so that we understand them to the best of our ability, or through your organizations have more meetings with the constituents and the people that you interact with. And so we are happy and committed to doing that. And so we can do that in a variety of forums. There's so many different ways to do it. You saw some of our ideas in our presentation, but I think if you have comment either within this forum, or please feel free to grab me after, or Ricardo, and we're open to better ways of doing it. We can always improve.
And I'll just add, as the leader of the community engagement process, that all of last year, and including the council meeting, we've done a lot of reflecting, and I've talked to a lot of you and a lot of other people about how can we continue to do better in terms of making people feel heard. And so part of it, I want to put it a little bit back on you all to help brainstorm with that, because I, of course, have lots of ideas. Part of that is developing deeper partnerships and relationships with community leaders and community members, and just being more creative. I think a lot of what we do can feel very dry and technical, and I want to work harder on making this material be more approachable and draw in more people into the conversation. So I have ideas, and I would love to have follow-up conversations to really dive into those with all of you. Tonight's an opportunity too. We're posing the question, what are your thoughts and ideas? What do you want us to consider? But also available offline as well. So thank you.
Thank you all. We'll go to Kevin and then to Jeffrey.
Hi, Kevin Chrisman, Gardner Neighborhood Association. This question is more for the city folks as well. From back in your presentation, Rosalind, I think about what does the DSAP cover? There's a list of 12 items there. Is that just merely a list, or is that a hierarchy? And then I'll have a follow-up question to that.
Yeah, so those lists of items are currently, what's currently in the existing Deer Dawn Station area document. It actually probably reflects the table of contents. So all of those sections are currently included in the existing Deer Dawn Station area plan.
Okay, because design guidelines is pretty far down on the list. It's 10th out of 12. And what I'm concerned about is there's some projects, like if you walk down Autumn from our neighborhood to go to the tank, there's a project that's for housing that's, you know, in the works possibly. And they're kind of getting a jump on everything before we get any design guidelines for the area in place. And I'm concerned that ultimately the whole area has a cohesive design element to it that sings well. It's not just a hodgepodge of things like, oh, well, you can tell, like, you know, in certain parts of the area, you can tell, like, oh, that building is from the 50s, and this building is from the 70s, and this building is from the 90s. You can date them by just their design character. And I'd like to see something a little bit more cohesive, I guess, is what I'm thinking. So how do we keep things under wraps so that we get excellent design on people that have kind of jumped the gun on the process a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And clearly we know that quality design is crucial for this new district. And to your point, so, you know, we've got development projects that are under construction now. We fully anticipate, you know, more development proposals coming forward. And I think you're absolutely right. So we'll have to definitely make sure that we're referencing just the recently approved City Council downtown design guidelines have been fully updated and really robust and really speak to issues of the architectural character, the quality, the public spaces, right? We know how crucial that's going to be. So your point is definitely spot on.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all. We're going to go to Jeffrey and then back here to David.
Dave, I just wanted to quickly clarify that that is the order in which they're listed in the DSAP. So it's the design guidelines are chapter 3, following all those other things. So
Thanks,
yeah,
Larry.
not a hierarchy.
Great. Yeah, Jeffrey Buchanan with Working Partnerships USA. Just one comment to the question about when the SOG gets to discuss the community benefits. I believe the council discussion was talking about the community benefits conversation perhaps preceding the SOG weighing in on the development agreement. I think it would be helpful for this group to not necessarily have to weigh in when the cake has already been baked, but hopefully earlier on in the process. So hopefully we can figure out a way to do that. My question, 2.5 months ago when we last met, the timeline that was presented both in the DISC process and from the staff talking about the process for the Google development, had an extra 12 months onto the timeline. I believe this is the first time that we've heard about the kind of condensed timeline. Given all the concerns of dealing with the housing crisis where we are, you know, you look at the DSAP, the process started in 2009 and it took until 2014. And since we first started that DSAP plan, you know, rents have gone up about 60%. The area around Dearden Station has become one of the kind of largest hotspots of displacement, more Latino families displaced than any other part of the city. Right now, it's hard to ignore tax growth's impact on displacement, housing prices, and all these things. And I appreciated, Joe, your comments at the end of the presentation that this is a focal point. But I think the fact that that wasn't really a vision for that and how that's actually done wasn't represented in the presentation, and that staff won't have begun their examination of the housing issue probably for a number of months. It takes time to do an RFP, get a consultant, design a study, get a study back, figure it out. I'm just really worried that we're pushing ahead on this timeline for an EIR in the fall before we really understand the impact of the housing issue, much less the solutions to the housing issue. And at the same time, per Teresa's comments, the DISC process we'll hear about later, they're not planning to be wrapped up until the fall of, 2021? Well, maybe we'll hear from them. What's the benefit of chopping 12 months off this development process, given all these complicated issues and the kind of lack of solutions at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. So when we went to council on December 4th, at that point we said that we think this phase 2, which is the project design and review, would be about 2 years. We said 2019, 2020, and we said plus. And so now we've had time to take a look at a number of factors and create what we think is sort of a realistic target plan. So you're absolutely right, Jeffrey. One of the factors was better understanding how the DISC project was going to integrate with the DSAP amendment process and with the review of the Google project. And actually, it's shaping up quite nicely because we expect by this fall that the preliminary concept for the rail and the station, there'll be a preferred concept. So that timing is quite good. We also took a look at those implementation plans, and you're absolutely right, that affordable housing implementation plan, how we're going to get to the 25% affordable housing in the Deer Down Station area. We have a path to work on that with our housing department. And then also, I want to clarify, on December 4th, council gave staff the direction to come up with a citywide anti-displacement strategy for residential and a citywide anti-displacement strategy for small business. And we are on track to bring those forward to council in the fall, and those will clearly have implications for this area as well as others. So at this point, and things can change, the other thing we had to look at was how long we think it will take to do the EIR, which will include the Google mixed-use plan, as well as for the DSAP amendments. And I do think it's really important to be clear that creating that original DSAP plan did take many years because we were starting from scratch. When we talk about amending the DSAP, we're really talking about making some likely incremental changes, because the vision, the primary objectives, a lot of what the community worked so hard for and what the council approved, we're really updating it 5 years later. So certainly some things have changed. So for those reasons, what we're saying now is I think what we said on December 4th is still generally true. 2019 and 2020 we'll be able to get the bulk of the work done. At least that's how things are looking right now.
Great, very informative. Thank you very much. We have about 5 more minutes left for this segment, about 4 more comments. So we'll try to get through these as efficiently as possible. But David, you're up.
Sure, thanks. David Meyer from Silicon Valley at Home. I just wanted to make a quick general comment on the DSAP amendment process, and really appreciate staff looking at kind of what's going to change, why is it going to change, and I think one thing that I've just been thinking about is how do we make sure that the original DSAP plan from 2014 and what was laid out then isn't going to constrain the vision that I think that this group has worked hard on, especially on the housing front, in terms of, obviously a lot more has changed than just the doubling of the heights, and that there's clearly a need for, an acknowledgement of a need for more housing than just doubling the current capacity. And so I just want to make sure, I guess it's just as a general comment, that as we're looking at, whether or not the 2014 plan can serve as what pieces of it serve as a useful model for kind of what we're looking at going forward, and how can we better reflect what I think this group has acknowledged as a need for more housing, for integrating that affordable housing piece, and also for you know, this plan that has the uses all kind of split up, and we know that if we want to have the active, vibrant spaces that we all envision, that housing should probably be more integrated throughout the plan. So I would just give that general comment about, as we're looking at that as the basis, and what are the potential shortcomings of that plan, and making sure that that doesn't constrain our ability to meet the housing goals that we all acknowledge are
Great.
necessary.
Yeah, no, that's a really fair point. Well, I think the DSAP had contemplated something around 2,500 units, and our goal is to exceed that through our plan itself, which is only a piece of the overall DSAP. So we absolutely acknowledge that the plan, which is partly why we're calling it mixed-use plan, it's set obviously more still that rooting of the downtown being the driver of where the job center is established by the city and the DSAP, but that getting more housing into the plan is very critical. And so we're absolutely working towards that, which you will see reflected in that late July presentation.
Great, thank you very much. I also want to note that Leah is doing a great job taking down all your notes as well, and this will be included in the summary. So thank you for all this great input. We'll go to John next, and then to Frank, and we'll wrap it up with Norma.
Hi, John Pettigo, PACT. So thank you for the presentation. I just want to echo the piece about affordable housing, in particular for the support workers housing. A lot of people on the east side are going to be working in the kitchen, janitorial work, landscaping work, and that's the reality for it. But I'd like to just see, encourage the thought partners with people that are working in those fields, and really kind of having your processes and your design of housing to take into account the already ongoing displacement of those families and individuals. And to that, I know that we can't boil the ocean, but if we were to follow that particular piece, a lot of those workers have their own children, have aspirations of becoming engineers and working at a Google, working at different companies in the Valley, but the educational resources in certain parts of the town, and the mentoring abilities and just some of those other kinds of things that are really necessary to give them the competitive edge that you would have in competing with kids from Los Gatos, Saratoga, other parts of the Valley. It'd be really great to see what Google might want to do in terms of interfacing with our public schools in that area to push up some of that, so that we would have those kids also be considered for internships. And then also there's the other piece is the culture at Google. When you bring in some of these kids into a work environment that doesn't really look like them, speak like them, or welcome them, there needs to be some effort on the receiving end of Google once they're there. That what are your plans? And again, having that conversations with people, how to make the culture of the workplace a place that is able to sustain employment, so that when those kids, if they do stay home, they're able to support their parents, they can stay in the place there is. I do have a concern that Jeffrey brings up too, is that for having these thoughtful conversations with thought partners, it feels that we're really driven by the timeline rather than driven by authentic conversations. So I think that we ought to give some consideration that if we're going to be slaves and focus just on that timeline, I'm worried that these very important conversations that hit on some granular pieces that are really important to give the data points for a really solid plan just aren't going to be made if we don't have that time to give to, if we're just focusing on the timeline and not on the authentic conversations.
Yeah, no, that's very fair. I think part of that is we've internalized a lot of what has been put out there so far, but we need to, in that late July meeting, just as we talked about, the intention isn't to say, here's the public benefits plan that we've negotiated in a vacuum, and here it is. It's actually to also bring forward in that session, here are some of the ways that we're thinking of addressing a lot of the topics you're bringing up through opportunity pathways in the project. Here's how some of our initial thoughts around housing and how to create the right housing ladder and so forth, so we can begin that conversation. And we definitely want to have those conversations with you in the interim on a one-on-one or group basis or whatever way we think is right. But we can feel it out too. I mean, we have to just see kind of as we go forward, what is the right process. So completely respected that we're not trying to kind of just get it done to get it done. We need to absolutely make sure it's done really thoughtfully. So, and then Rebecca, I'm not sure if there's anything from a broader policy perspective that you wanted to add for Google overall.
I just wanted to echo echo your concerns about exposing youth from all of San Jose to STEM. And we've hosted a number of events with the school district to really show that exposure. We've also been recruiting from San Jose State for years. We're ramping up those efforts. And we're also funding a number of nonprofits to really develop that pipeline that you're talking about. So the groundwork is being laid, and we really want to make sure that everyone's voice in how we develop that pipeline and how other ideas on exposure and some of the other things that we're talking about are all part of the menu that we're creating.
Great, thank you. And this goes back to what Lori mentioned earlier as well, is we want all your great ideas of how to reach every socio-demographic background in the community, John. So if you have ideas of events that are happening, places we can be to make sure those voices are heard, please let us know. Thank you. So Frank, you're next, and we'll come back here to Norma.
Hey everybody, it's Frank Ponciano, representing Downtown Resident Association. And my first time here representing the association as an alternate. I want to call attention to the sign that Sandy Perry is holding in the back. I'm sure everybody's seen it. It's really a sad, and I'm sure everybody's aware of the details of what the story is. But that is the sad condition that we're in as a city and as a region. And frankly, I'm troubled by the lack of detail around answers that have to do with housing, because what we don't need in this current juncture is market rate housing. That is exactly what we don't need. And I know that we have a 25%, I believe, affordable housing put away for affordable housing in the DSAP. But I would contend not even that is enough to sort of ameliorate our situation, which I don't think anybody here would deny Google, among other folks in the tech industry, are directly responsible in some ways for. So that being the case, I guess there's a question for Google here around, are we willing possibly to do more than 25%? And also, then there is a suggestion around, when we talk about the community benefits in the next meeting, what are going to be the details on the housing, the affordable housing that will be brought about? Is it extremely low-income housing? Is it permanent supportive housing? Because that's what we need, so that 2 years from now, we don't have double what we had in 2017 in terms of homeless population. So I guess that's the question. Are we willing to do more than 25%? I know we have the money for it.
Yeah, I just want to start with, again, because this MOU, if you haven't read it, it's been out for quite a while, but I just really encourage you to read it, because this is the direction from council, and the topic you're raising is really, really important. So let me just say what it says, because this is sort of our marching orders from council.
Can I say, I was working in Councilman Rocha's office, and I took part in drafting suggestions for that
I don't have my
MOU.
glasses on, but I recognize you across the way. So yeah, awesome, thank you. So but just for the benefit of everybody else then, it says, shared goal, grow and preserve housing. Contribute funding through a community benefits contribution and/or a downtown-wide linkage fee and/or a financing district, which may be combined with other services to develop and preserve housing in the city to help address rising housing costs and displacement. Housing in the Diridon Station area should include on-site units affordable to incomes ranging from extremely low income to missing middle households in combination with market rate homes. Affordable units can be built both integrated into market rate developments and as standalone affordable housing projects. The parties, as a goal, but not as a specific requirement on Google alone. Strive for 25% of the housing developed in the Deardown Station area to be affordable, with a mix of affordability levels to be negotiated in a future development agreement. So what council said is, we want to raise our aspirations for affordable housing in the area as a whole to 25%. Google, the base expectation is like it is for everybody else, at 15%, and then we will work with them as we develop the DA to see how it's feasible to encourage them to get higher, as well as targeting our affordable housing resources so that we have some 100% affordable projects in the Deardown Station area, so the people in those projects can benefit from the transit and all of the amenities are there. So these are the marching orders we've got from council, and it is really important. So we'll be getting down to brass tacks, working with our housing department specialists, and then we'll get feedback from you as we go along, because we know how important this is.
So my question to Google stands, actually, because I didn't hear from Google. Are we willing to invest more than what has been delineated in previous conversations, a lot more, into especially extremely low-income housing and permanent supportive housing?
Okay. I think you need to let us do the plan, because the plan shows how much commercial we're going to have versus residential, which there is a nexus there, and that's the commercial linkage, goes back to the commercial linkage fee conversation. We know that projects today, if they're at 15% affordable housing at type 1, are struggling to make that work. We know we can do better than that because we have the ability to basically use the effect of a commercial linkage fee to get higher. But we need to, the plan partly tells you, once you see what the plan is generating, then we can partly say, how high can we go? Because we know how much commercial relative to the residential we have, and we can work through that. So there's not a simple yes or no for you today. There's a let's keep at it together, but I appreciate the directness of the question. Yes.
All right, all. We are well over time now, so we're going to take Norma's and then Reginald's and Jeffrey. If you don't mind, we'll come back to this maybe by the end and have additional conversation. We don't want to shortchange the station plan conversation. So Norma, you're up.
Thank you. Norma Camacho of Valley Water. And I know early on we had a lot of discussion about early implementation and activation of spaces before the development and construction of the project. And I'm wondering if that's still on the table as well, especially areas surrounding Los Gatos Creek. And if so, is it going to follow or be folded into this EIR process as well? Or is there an opportunity to separate some of those from the EIR process? Excuse me, so that we can have some early wins?
So yes, we are working on an early activation strategy. It's part of the social infrastructure plan of how can we start to activate the place sooner, build capacity, so when the place does start to get developed, people can spin off in it. So the answer is yes, and by when? By this fall, like we're trying to get it. Yeah.
You have to do some work to some of the buildings just to get them into the shape where those types of activities can occur. But we absolutely are working on the plan as we speak, and we intended to bring that back almost as part of the overall plan and how it builds up over time come late July.
And we're also having conversations around that early activation with the Sharks as well, because we think there's some interesting synergies of actually reaching out with them to, to start to create more activity on the site.
Great. We'll take one final comment or question from Reginald, then we'll transition to the next agenda item.
Yes, well, since I've been here, I've based at Reginald Swilly Minority Business Consortium. I've been, the overall economic structure of what's going on in our community and actually around the country, this is why we have so much homelessness, is because we are not turning dollars over in our communities. Everybody's scrapping to get as much as they can and stack shit away, and we have small businesses not being involved. I was slightly disappointed, maybe more than slightly disappointed, that it was not emphasized more in the report that we put out about using local and diverse business communities, the communities been previously unengaged in these big development processes. We have cranes coming up around town, which is a great thing. But if it's not helping the small businesses around here, it's that we're going to feel the impact in one way or another. If the dollars that can be turned over here is moved out. And I think that our company has been in some conversations with Google about this. And I think that as a city, we need to put emphasis on this. And I think it will help us economically, and that will help impact much of the homelessness and much of the decrease in our economic structure around here. So I would like for us to put a little more emphasis on that, please.
Great. Appreciate that.
Can I just add something to that? And Norma, it gets back to the temporary activation. So we have started that discussion. There's no reason for us not to start dealing with that already. So Ricardo's on it, and we're starting to look at how do we get more active that and across our projects in the valley. So that's part of getting prepared for the future, because it is absolutely something important that we got to focus on.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for this great conversation. Now we're going to go ahead and transition to the next agenda item on the Diridon Integrated Station Concept Plan.
Hi, everyone. Matt Ramey, good to see you all. We are now going to switch over to the Diridon Integrated Station Concept Plan. So Martin and Liz, if you all want to come on up. We're about 20 minutes over where we were on the agenda. One thing I'd like to ask for is if there are members of the community who want to come and give comments at public comments, if you could please fill out a card and bring that up so we get a sense of how many people want to present. So we're going to jump in now to an actual very detailed and meaty piece of information. What we're going to do, we're going to do a presentation first, and then what we are going to do is first, we're going to ask you after the presentation to ask some questions. And we're going to take all of the questions first before we answer the questions, because I want to make sure that we get a chance to hear everyone's questions. And then we're going to talk about some pros and cons of the ideas that you're going to see tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Liz, and then we'll come back up afterwards.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm Liz Scanlon. I am the program manager for the Diridon Station Concept Plan, and I'll let my colleague also introduce himself.
I am Martin Brinkhuis with Team ABC, and I'm the project manager.
Okay, so we have a lot to cover, so I'm going to talk really fast for the first half and allow Martin to get into some content. We have some things to show you, and then, as Matt said, we'll go back and we'll do around a Q&A at the end. Okay. So just a quick reminder, you have seen this many, many times. 4 partner agencies are co-creating this concept plan. Want to highlight for you that we won't get everything we want, but you will get more than you expected is a bit of a mantra that we are consistently reminding ourselves of. You've also seen these key objectives many, many times. Reminder that the items on the blue list are sort of speak to the conceptual design principles, and the items in orange speak a little bit more to organization and governance items, but the intent is keep coming back to these objectives as we go through our conceptual planning process. You've seen a version of this projects and timing. This is a sort of what we dub the swim lanes graphic that shows all of the projects that are happening, and you've already heard about quite a few of them between Rosalind and the Google presentation, that there's a lot going on in the area. And so this represents at the top bar 2019 through roughly 2029, and all the different things happening. And just to acknowledge that we are aware that there's a lot to coordinate on, and I think we're getting better and better at doing that. And I think in a couple of our last rounds of outreach, we heard a lot about, well, how does this all work together in space and over what arc of time, right? So we know there's a lot going on in this area over some period of time. It could be the next 10 years, it could be beyond that. And what we've tried to represent is some spatial sort of thinking about how you could sequence in projects. So this is really conceptual. It's just to get us thinking about lots is happening in the space at the same time, potentially for quite a long time. Caltrain electrification is already under construction and will be done in a couple of years. We have the BART project that is well underway, as you know, environmentally cleared and going into construction in the next couple of years. We know there is station area plan implementation in the Google project in this relative vicinity. This is the DSAP outline. And then we have high-speed rail at some point coming into Northern California and stopping in San Jose, and then the integrated concept plan. Again, this is just to sort of help us think through as we're walking through our conceptual design process. How would you start to sequence in projects over some time frame? We're figuring that out, and we will work all together to make sure it gets done the right way. So our phase 1 process and outreach rounds. So we started in the fall with objectives and ambitions by the partner agencies. We were here a couple of months ago and we showed you those key elements, which were the track configurations in terms of vertical kind of organization, as well as the station horizontal layouts. And tonight we're going to show you some potential layouts for this intermodal hub, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And where we're headed is eventually getting to where we have sort of a draft spatial vision that the partner agencies can weigh in on, hopefully tell us keep going and keep developing this program. We've also done quite a bit of community outreach and have been taking that input and putting it back into the design process. I think what we find really encouraging and exciting is that the themes that are coming out of the outreach are very consistent with what the partner agencies are also thinking about in terms of passenger experience, identity, access, connectivity, development, all of these great themes. I think it's wonderful to see that our community partners are sort of in a very good alignment with our public agency partners. So the concept plan process it was designed, I don't know, maybe the Dutch way, but it's a more iterative sort of planning. It's very planning focused, right? Sometimes we jump right into environmental clearance before we've done a little bit of planning. So we intentionally decided to start with requirements and understanding each other, the 4 partners, what they require, and what their ambitions are. So what do we hope to get out of this? We've also been hearing from the community, and then we're iterating through ideas, and we've hired Arcadis Bentham Crowell, who have international experience with similar projects. So they're bringing to us their experiences in the Netherlands and other locations, and they're helping do quite a bit of assessment on these ideas. And then all that we're sort of advancing are things that hold the most promise to meet the objectives that the partners set out for. And the graphic you can see is sort of the spatial Lego building block item that we will hopefully come out of phase 1 with. So tonight we're going to start to talk a little bit about what we're calling the big moves and the kit of parts. And again, we've shown this a couple times, but these are sort of the Legos or the building blocks that make an intermodal hub. This is an illustrative graphic from a project in the Netherlands, but it sort of represents that you have to have a bunch of ingredients in order to have a successful intermodal station. And so what we've started with looking at, and again, we showed you, I guess in February, was it? The vertical platform position, the station the platforms being at grade, kind of where they are today, or maybe a little elevated, and station locations between San Fernando and Santa Clara Street, with something on maybe Stover Street, which is a bit in the middle between San Fernando and Santa Clara. And then because of those different station locations affect the actual heavy rail corridor. So there is some considerations around what we call the northern alignment, which goes to the north towards the Caltrain maintenance facility and connects into the Peninsula corridor. And of course the southern alignment as it travels south, points southwards towards Tamiah and Gilroy. And we have a couple of ideas on how that southern alignment might be configured. And so the items that we're going to show you tonight are not intended for anyone we don't want you to pick one that you like. We want to talk about the priorities of the components in the kit of parts and what works really well. These are going to represent sort of a spectrum of things, and the intent will be to mix and match and optimize to come up with the right layout and the right spatial organization for Deardan. So the kit of parts includes sort of everything you need to have a great intermodal station. So pedestrians and bikes, how you get to and through the station, where does the light rail go relative to the heavy rail tracks, to the station entrance hall, the center of gravity? How do the VTA buses sort of access the station off of the main arterials? Of course, it's really important that we have a great BART connection for our new BART station. We have lots of intercity bus and taxis, TNCs, shuttles, scooters, hovercraft, skateboards, you name it, we have it at Deardan, and we want to make sure there's space for those technologies, but emerging technologies that we haven't even thought of yet. And then an airport connector. The city is exploring how to connect the Deardan station to San Jose Mineta Airport, and we want to think about where would we put that connection relative to space. And then, of course, parking and how do we still enable some auto access to the site. I will say on the airport connector and parking, what you're going to see tonight are those two elements are not as well developed as sort of the top of this list. We are mindful and they are being considered. In terms of parking, it's something that we recognize is a pretty big issue in this area, but we're also really partnering with the City of San Jose relative to a district parking sort of study that they're doing, which also connects into the DSAP and sort of this larger programming of parking in the area, and so we're connected to that, and we'll be doing quite a bit more work, I think, in phase 2 relative to parking as it relates to the concept plan process. So in terms of mixing and matching, what you see here in what we call kind of the honeycomb graphic, the top of the top of this honeycomb are the big moves, right? So you can see vertical platforms, station location, north alignment, south alignment. And if you pick discrete choices within that, you get different outcomes for the station. And all the colorful sort of parts of the honeycomb are all the other modes, the sort of kit of parts. And so when you stick these together, you sort of start to put together a layout for the intermodal station. And if you mix and match those, you get slightly different outcomes depending on where the buses might go. You might have a different sort of transfer connection to your taxi, your TNC, or your light rail. And so this is, you're going to see us sort of talk through kind of what happens when you mix and match these components. There's different benefits and trade-offs for the intermodal station. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Martin. He's going to walk you through our layouts.
Thank you, Liz. And it's a reminder of the layouts we're showing. It should give us a better understanding of how that would work for operations like heavy rail, light rail, bus, and also how it influenced the urban fabric. I'm starting with layout 1, which we are calling San Fernando Street. And with every layout, I'll show you the current situation with a zoomed out version like this, which is the rail corridor. And I'll zoom in a little more on the intermodal hub. So with every layout, I'll do 2 aspects, a zoomed out one with the heavy rail corridor and more zoomed in around the intermodal hub. Here you can see the station area today. We've included street names, SAP building, and the rail corridor for your reference. And when we talk about San Fernando Street, it's an at-grade station. It's some changes to which we discussed last time, which are around the train station, which should facilitate the future operations. Not much of a difference to the north and the south alignment. Some changes definitely to the intermodal hub themselves. This is what that would be like if you do mixing and matching of the elements we're choosing. Now let me zoom in a little bit more on the intermodal hub itself. This is how the station area is today, and you can see in the different colors all the different modes or the different elements which should be all combined in this way. I think it's important to know, as this is the configuration more zoomed in, that all layouts assume that a through running station. This means that currently we have trains laying over at Dearden Station. That will not happen anymore. They will be out of the train station and moving either north or south away from the train station itself. And here you see the layout at grade for the station. Now let me take you through one element to start with. You can see here a station building. You see some note to it where the entrance will be recessed. That we have a concourse underneath the tracks because the tracks are at grade, and you need access to the station from an underground facility. We have obviously a BART layout, and with all layouts, they will assume the current corridor as VTA is planning the rollout of phase 2. There needs to be spaces for VTA buses, intercity buses, and light rail as well, which you can see here. And last but definitely not least, the taxis, TNCs, pickup and drop-offs. As you might see, this is how it would all work together. This does not necessarily preclude any development. This is how the elements would look like together in one layout. Because the train station here and the tracks are at grade, we need to create new underpasses because it's a little wider than it currently is. and we need to create new underpasses or overpasses around San Carlos. And what we think of this is that we have the railroad more acting as a barrier. You have to use an underpass or an overpass to cross the tracks. The other interesting thing about this layout is that it had the train station access from the heavy rail to BART is relatively far away, around 2 blocks. And this layout might not necessarily meet all our ambitions for creating the next intermodal hub at Dearden. So that leads me to another layout, layout number 2. It's called Santa Clara Street. And again, I'm starting with a zoomed out heavy rail corridor, how that would look like. It's an elevated train station, and its center of gravity is around Santa Clara Street, which you can see here close to the SAP Center. What you can also see are 2 heavy rail corridors going south, one along the existing corridor south, and one with a new corridor going towards along I-280-87. This assumes that high-speed rail would be using the new I-280-87 corridor, and it assumes all diesel operations and Caltrain trains going through the current existing corridor south. Because we have 2 rail corridors, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit more into the intermodal hub itself, because we have 2 rail corridors coming south and 1 rail corridor going north to up to the peninsula. We need to somehow connect these 2, and you can see them up north on the top right of the image, a so-called flyover to get back onto the tracks to the north corridor, because we also need to connect the freight operations to the Warm Springs sub going under Highway 87. That is it for the heavy rail components. Now let me zoom in on more so on the intermodal hub itself. Here you can see the train station, and also why we call it Santa Clara Street. It's an elevated, again, as a reminder, where we think this station creates access to the west and to the east of this train station. It is very close to the BART entrance. You could even consider something as a direct connection from BART to the train station itself. The VTA buses are located around Autumn Street. Most of the buses come south, but there are definitely also a lot of buses using an east-west connection along Santa Clara Street, which will have to use this facility to turn off to Santa Clara Street with a quick stop and go back in their existing route. Light rail is located at the station at grade, so very close to the concourse. It makes for an easy transfer between light rail users to the train station users if needed. And what you can see also on the left of the image, a light rail comes up along the elevated structure, crosses San Fernando, and then goes down to at grade, so it connects to the train station at grade. Then it continues further along its current alignment down into downtown. The next bit is, it's highlighted in purple. You can see the intercity buses along Autumn Street, also the taxis, TNCs, company shuttles, pickup and drop off, also located around this Autumn Street. And here you can see them all integrated together. The next one is, we call it Stover Street. It's a street not as well known, but it's right there next to, between Cale and Santa Clara. Here you can see again the station area as it is today. And here the heavy rail corridor. What you see here south is that all trains would be using the existing rail corridor south. And the rail corridor north is slightly changed. I'll zoom into it a little bit more because that helps. Here you have the current station area as it is today. Because we are shifting the platforms north, because we would like to have a concourse around 1/3 to 2/3 of the platforms for good loading of the trains, equal loading and distribution of the trains. We are moving the platforms a little bit more north. That does require a new alignment up north. What this means, and this also is necessary for the other layout, both this layout and layout number 2 both require CMOF to be moved south of the train station because of this new train alignment up north. The concourse itself is a diagonal, or oblique as we sometimes call it, through the station. So hence this connects Alameda on the west and around Stover Street to the east of the train station. Something which we appreciate about this layout is that if you stand in front of this train station around Stover Street, you can have a direct, clear line of sight on Santa Clara into downtown. So there's an easy wayfinding, a natural wayfinding of getting into downtown as you want to exit the train station, or vice versa. Obviously, BART is again located on Santa Clara. VTA buses here are bus bays right at the front door of the station concourse, and they would be just off of Santa Clara. And even also with this one, and I've said that to the previous one as well, here could be also development on top. But this is how functionally would you in its current alignment.
Excuse me, are you opening San Fernando Street on these last two? San Fernando is closed off now.
Thank you for that question, actually. What you can see here is it's elevated tracks, and because it's a sketch, it looks like it's a complete embankment of tracks. That is not necessarily the case. That is something we are working on, or what actually would be happening under the tracks. As again, these sketches are meant to give us an idea of what the configuration would look like and how it would interact with the urban fabric. What you see here is a different element altogether. This is an element where we would add on to the tracks another elevated piece of structure where taxis, pick-up and drop-offs and intercities could stop, drop off their passengers, and they would be going into the concourse to go into other modes. The entrance and exit of this facility and vice versa would be through Julian Street or San Carlos, and it would be a direct connection to all the other modes. And here you see them. And here you see everything connected together. So that was a whirlwind of information for me in a very short amount of time, also to make sure that we have enough time for your questions. There was one more thing I want to discuss with you before we started our presentation with mixing and matching. Now let me tell you one more thing on how that would work. Here we have an example, and this is Stover Street with all the elements, the honeycombs being picked, which would form one layout. Now, let's assume with the next slide that we would have a station location at San Fernando. That gives us three options, three ideas on where we would put the VTA buses. Now, let me toggle to the next slide, and we would put a station position on Santa Clara. That leaves us, with our current ideas and our current insights, with only one location for the VTA buses. So this is what you would get, what we mean with mixing and matching. It's not that you can choose anything you like which would work together. There are some constraints. Some are simple physical constraints, and some are constraints which we are working with the partner agencies, because there are always trade-offs we have to make together. And
Okay, real quick reminder, you saw this in our last meeting, the evaluation framework. And this is the categories that we're going to be using going forward to help evaluate some of these layouts. I want to just call out that in the last presentation, community and environmental were stuck together as a single category. We took the advice of our community partners and split those into two discrete elements. So community gets more at neighborhood atmosphere and that sort of thing, and environmental speaks a little bit more to actual natural environment type things. We thought that was a great comment, and we will be moving forward on that. So this is just a reminder that you've seen this before. We'll be coming to you again in future presentations with more on the criteria. And then very briefly, in terms of just our next steps, we're in outreach round number 3 here tonight. We'll have a community meeting on June 10th. We're going to do a couple of events at the station itself to get some feedback from riders today on June 6th and June 13th. And then in terms of what the partner agencies are going to be doing with the layouts and the optimization, we'll collect all of our public feedback that will feed into the design process with Martin's team. So we'll be identifying optimization opportunities, mix and match, hopefully arriving at sort of a draft spatial vision that we'll seek more feedback on, likely in the fall timeframe, and then we'll be presenting something to the partner agency policies and boards. And I think that's it. I just want to also make sure and call out our public agency partners. This is not about Liz and Martin doing all this, but Melissa, Kelly, and Jim Unitas and our city partners. The 4 partner agencies are here, so I might call on them to help me answer questions as needed, because this is really their project too. So with that, I think, ready?
Yep. Okay. All right. So that was a lot to chew on. That was a lot of information. I've seen that multiple times and been through it, and I see something different every time. So with that in mind, just a couple of quick things. So this is not the one opportunity where the public, you all, as well as the public, can provide comments and questions on this. As Liz said, there's a public workshop on June 10th and another one on June 15th. The city is also offering stakeholder presentations, so staff can go out, Lori can go out to your neighborhood association, to your organization, and talk about these different layouts, Lori and team. So, I think there's a lot here. So what I want to try and do here is first to take questions, not answer the questions individually, but just take questions of clarification, just because there is so much information here. And then Martin and Liz will try going through and answering those questions collectively. And then we can come back and talk about some pros and cons of different options and maybe additional information that you all think would be helpful to understand the complexity of what's going on here. Okay, a little bit different format. So just going to start. Again, I'm going to go around the room and we'll just see if people have questions. Yeah, so again, this is questions, answers later. Yeah, let's go around because there might be multiple questions related to this.
Hi, Jay Bailey, San Jose State. Among the evaluation criteria, number 1 is any one more important, than the other, and is one of the unwritten criteria the likelihood of completion of any one of these systems?
And I would just add around costs. Nathan Ho from the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Do any of the options have, I'm sure they have varying costs given elevated platform versus widening of the platforms?
So questions, if you have them. Hopefully pass the mic.
I'm Jody Starbird from the Guadalupe River Park Conservancy. My question is, with the elevated versions, does that mean that Santa Clara Street will no longer have that deep dip? Will that be able to be eliminated? Because that's a super barrier for pedestrians and bicyclists. I also want to be sure that whatever pathways and connectivity that you have hooks up to our trail system, both at the Los Gatos Creek and the Guadalupe River, to be sure that there's dedicated walking paths and bike paths for folks who will be commuting that way.
Thank you. I love the model. It makes me feel much better about making progress. My question is the light rail a constraint Is it an anchor? Are there any what-if plans that eliminate light rail?
Michelle Azevedo with the San Jose Downtown Association. So I just wanted to say we're really excited about the project, and it's wonderful to start seeing some of the real planning that goes into it. But I just wanted to ask, is there a deadline for this round of community input? Because that would be really good to know, because this is so complicated and we really want to make sure we get you detailed feedback. But we need to have enough time to discuss with our members and get you something really thoughtful.
John Bedigo, PACT. Just curious if you have part of this conversation as you build, how are we going to interface with the unhoused community that's in different places in the area, and the displacement, and where the folks go as their homes are in that area? Will they be going to the adjacent neighborhoods? How will they be treated? How are we going to work with that community as we in a humane and positive way as we move through the construction phases of the project? Just like to hear some details on that.
Appreciated, Jeffrey Buchanan, Working Partnerships, appreciated that equity was noted as one of the community concerns, but how will equity be incorporated into the decision-making process, particularly when, perhaps it could be a part of access in seeing the different options and thinking about, limited mobility folks who are riding, a VTA bus or VTA light rail. Just be good to hear how equity is actually incorporated.
Kevin Chrisman, Gardner Neighborhood Association. These are interesting building blocks, but I'm not quite sure the neighborhoods are being treated in a way that I would like to see reflected in that. There's a component here where the neighborhoods are more of a constraint rather than a building block that I think that needs to be considered, and I'll just leave it at that.
Kathy Sutherland from Delmas Park. I'd like to know if there are some hard things that need to happen. For example, moving CMOF. Is that a given that that's going to move? And if it's not a given, what does it constrain if it doesn't move?
Which of the layouts provides the most long-term capacity for future expansion of rail services? Teresa Alvarado Whisper.
Harvey Darnell, North Willow Glen. I liked the proposal on Santa Clara because it created an elevated track and two south heavy rail lines. But on Stover Street, that particular one only shows one. If you move CMOF down south, it suddenly puts through my neighborhood, rather than 20 trains a day, about 150 trains a day. And so that is a great concern. Can Stover be done with two lines south?
I'm Bill Burke, Plant 51. What would the height of the elevated platform be that the trains are on and running by?
Norma Camacho, Valley Water. I see in many of these alternatives, there are new intersections with Los Gatos Creek, and I was wondering whether or not any consideration was given on basically, is this going to mean further, covering of the creek, and what is the impact going to be on construction to the creek areas? Because there is going to be an impact.
Laurel Winter, St. Leo's neighborhood, to build on Bill Burke's concern. What would the height be? Clearly, there are some advantages to not having the pedestrian and vehicular underpasses anymore along the tracks, but as the neighborhood, the only residential neighborhood that would be impacted by elevated tracks, that has some really big implications. Being able to get smoothly from west to east is one thing. Having our neighborhood in the shadow of an elevated track is completely another, and can't be discounted. Another question I have is, in all of these scenarios, what happens to the historic train station?
Jonathan Martinez, Cahill, Georgetown Homeowners Association. Is it possible to get a community meeting with St. Leo's, Plant 51, and Georgetown and Cahill?
All right. Thank you for the questions. I did get the microphone back, which facilitating a meeting is always dangerous to let go of the microphone. Now, this was, again, an experiment to get everyone's questions first, and because I think there might be multiple overlaps for answers. So I'm going to turn it over to Liz and let her try and answer as many of the questions as she can. And if anything is missed, then you want to throw out follow-up questions, you can go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I think this is great. I will start with, I think I said it last time, but just to say it again, the planning process that we designed is intentionally to figure out kind of space, and we'll probably end up asking more questions than it answers. So sometimes if tonight we can't answer everything, it's because we haven't necessarily dove into design, architecture, SQL level analysis. We will get there as we go, and we are thinking about kind of the big sort of implications of a lot of these and sort of the benefits and trade-offs that most of you are asking about, we are digging into. So, but it's pretty high level, and we'll get down into more details as we go along. So I just want to kind of preface it with that. I kind of heard a couple of buckets of things that were asked about the physical design of the elevated tracks and what maybe happens with the Caltrain maintenance facility and how that works. I heard a little bit about kind of the Creek Historic Station. That's a little bit more on the environmental side. Some of the modal elements and what are we doing about those. So we'll take them and see if we get everybody, and happy to clarify. So maybe some easy ones first. So the elevated tracks are roughly 25 feet above where they are today, approximately. Just so to give you some sense, I don't know if I have a point of reference, but it's not what sort of high-speed rail had, some fairly high elevations. This is a kind of more nominal, but it is elevated over what it is today. CMOF does have some implications depending on, or the Caltrain maintenance facility in two of the layouts does move because of the northern track alignment. In the San Fernando at grade, it does not have to move. Although I would say one of the important components and input into this process has been the Caltrain business plan, which is looking at future service vision for the Peninsula Corridor. And so there may be things that are happening that synergize with that. We wanted to make sure we had a spectrum. So at least one alternative that doesn't touch CMOF and one that does. And so to the future proofing question about does this accommodate kind of the future rail capacities, we think it does, but we're still working through iterating with Caltrain and high-speed rail relative to the levels of service for the future. And the business plan has not taken an action or picked sort of a trajectory yet. So we think we've got a good configuration, but we need to continue to kind of work through that we got it right. But we think so far it's looking about right. Let's see, so that was tracks, future bill. And so CMOF can move. It doesn't have to if we pick sort of the at grade, which has implications with how the tracks are laid out going north. Yes, we want to connect the station to paths and trails. It's a really important part of this, that the access to and from the station through the city works really well for everybody. And so we're looking at ways that the station synergizes in itself. So when you get to the station, you know where to park your bike, you know where to sort of go to catch your train. And then once you leave the station, you know very clearly where the paths are to points wherever, downtown, residential neighborhoods, points south. So that's really important. We haven't gotten into the granularity of exactly how that's going to work, and it feeds into the downtown transportation plan and the DSAP process. But it's a goal of this project that all of it works really well, and it's very easy, very intuitive to get out of the station or into the station, and once you're there, you know where to go. Light rail is not a constraint. It's just an element that we think is important to accommodate. It's not being looked at being eliminated, but there's definitely some interest in optimizing once it leaves Dearborn, maybe some optimization of the system, the VTA system, and I think the downtown transportation plan, maybe some work with VTA will get into that. We're accommodating putting it somewhere at Dearborn, and so the options that we've looked at can connect it to its existing alignment, or it could move in the future. We're trying to be open to having a couple of layouts that could, once it leaves Dearborn, connect into some kind of different system. So that's going to go through sort of downtown transportation plan and VTA. Let's see. I'm going to take land acquisition next because it kind of relates to hard design items. So, and cost and implementation. Let's maybe touch on that a little bit. So, when we started this process, we intentionally were going to be visionary about it. We did not want to throw any obstacles in. Maybe some projects sometimes look at things like cost and implementation as a potential, sometimes can be a constraint in itself. We intentionally are going at this trying to figure out the right layouts. It could be a little dangerous because it could be that we're picking fairly complex and expensive items, but I think the partner agencies really wanted to look at a bold vision first. So we will be looking at costs. We will be looking at costs in the spectrum of sort of, I look at it like a Yelp review, like is it $1 figure, $3 figures, $5 figures, to give a spectrum of potential cost of implementation. And we are starting to think about sequencing and construction phasing. We need to keep the rail operations and all the modes operating at Dearborn so that people can still use the station while it's happening. We're mindful that the BART project and the Google project and a whole lot of stuff is going to be happening over a really long period of time, and trying to figure out the right ways to do that. So you can either get in there and do it really fast and try to knock it all out in a short period of time, which maybe requires some funding to be in alignment, or it might take several years to sort of germinate and sequence in over time. So we're thinking about that. We haven't solved that equation yet, but that is definitely forefront on the partner's mind to figure out how we would build it. We don't think we have come up with anything that is infeasible to construct. It'll just be kind of an orchestra and a dance of how you would layer in new major infrastructure while other new major infrastructure is being built. Let's see. I think.
Do you want to break here for a second?
Sure,
Let me
yeah.
let me hand it over to Lori to maybe. That was impressive. Lori, I'm going to turn over to you to ask for some of the community engagement and the timing for getting questions back.
Perfect. Let Liz catch your breath a little bit.
Sure. So I heard what is the deadline for feedback, and so we don't have a hard deadline, but I think that we'll be collecting our feedback through June on this round. So really by end of June would be a good target for submitting, a more detailed comment letter if that's what you're interested in. And to Jonathan's question about a neighborhood meeting, the answer is 100% yes. Let's coordinate on that. The easiest way is if you give us a couple dates and times, and we'll just make sure that it works with a few staff members, and then work with you in terms of where, how much time we have, what kind of format you want to use. So we're pretty flexible. Typically, they revolve around the material we have, like in terms of a PowerPoint, but we don't have to do a PowerPoint if that's not what you want to do. But
And before we go on, I just want to ask one more time. If there's anyone from the public who wants to give a public comment, we can. If you haven't filled out a form yet, great. We'll get to that. We have 3 people. I'm trying to judge time so we have the appropriate amount of time for public comment as well as for comments. Okay, Liz, back to you, and then we'll come back to all of you for some follow-up questions and comments.
I missed a few, so I'm going to keep going. Okay.
We figured that would happen.
The dip on Santa Clara, that's a great question. The intent would be if the tracks get elevated, we do have an opportunity to smooth out or fix some of the roadways. The intent of the project is to connect neighborhoods and connect downtown and points to the west. So the idea would be if you're going to go in and rebuild the tracks, we should probably fix the roadways and make it work really well and have a great pedestrian and street environment. Jim, I don't think I actually said anything about land acquisition. I started on that and I lost my train of thought. So no, we haven't looked in specific detail about land acquisition. We recognize that we're showing concepts that kind of lays a trail right on top of stuff. So we need to continue down the path and try to figure out what that means relative to benefits and trade-offs, right? So the idea, again, is big vision, and then we're going to have to distill into how we would deal with the impacts, but how we would also make sure and leverage benefit. I think it's important to also say, I think in the partner's mind, the idea that when we did some research on other projects, you start with a vision and over time it's going to mold and change and morph and look different, probably in implementation than it did when we have the idea. So we recognize that over time, this vision is going to mold as implementation advances, right? So we will hopefully build something that achieves all the objectives. It just may not look exactly like what we're showing in these early planning phases. So I think it's important to acknowledge that because there's a lot of work to figure out all the details to make it happen, right? Historic station, yeah, we're not sure what's going to happen to the historic station. Could it be encapsulated in the new station? Maybe. Could it move? Maybe. Something cool can happen to it. We have to explore that, but we're certainly showing that something is going to change in that particular environment. And we're sensitive that that's a really big community issue, and we need to work on figuring out what the right answer is of that. I've seen train stations all over the world where historic structures were fully melded into the new thing in a really appropriate and contextual way. So that's definitely an option that we will have to look at. Martin, do you want to, am I missing anything? Maybe pause and see if there's any additional questions, because we're moving.
Okay, yeah.
really fast, too.
So we have about 7 minutes until we then move into the public comment period. So I just want to be cognizant of time. Are there any additional questions that came out of that?
Great, thanks.
Nathan.
Nathan Ho, Silicon Valley Leadership Group. You had mentioned an airport connection and not being fully baked. Is there an option that leads better to that, or is that still really unknown with all three options?
It's still pretty fluid. I think that we are feeling pretty confident we can work the airport connector in, but we haven't spent a lot of time on it yet. We need to continue to work on that as we advance the layouts.
Okay. Another question?
Actually, I didn't get an answer to my question about the Stover alignment being able to have a dual south.
The answer is yes.
Okay. So it was just you were showing what if one south.
Correct. It's like you saw the layout with Santa Clara and the two corridors going south, and with the mixing and matching, as we explained, you can have a Stover Street with two rail corridors south.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Norma.
I didn't get Los Gatos.
Norma Camacho, Valley Water. And I guess you don't have an answer in terms of impacts to Los Gatos Creek?
No, I saw your cart go up and I thought, Los Gatos in there either. We again, it's an important feature. We did, in the early sort of work, look at major fatal flaws with the creek in terms of some of the track alignments we showed before would have had some different effects. And we moved away from those because they would have been fairly significant. And we want to improve the connection and utilize that green corridor. Haven't gotten into a lot of the details of how we'll do that, so that's something we can keep working on, but we recognize it's an important asset to connect to and also mitigate in the right way if something happens. We haven't looked at, will we cover it, would we go over it? We haven't really gotten into that detail yet.
Yeah. And I would recommend having some meetings with the environmental community and ourselves and other entities like the Conservancy as well too, to get more specific feedback.
That'd be great.
Okay. Laura?
Laura Winter, St. Leo's neighborhood. I'm going to go out on a limb here in regards to the decision on the historic station. Let me just recommend strongly that you plan on keeping it and some sort of adaptive reuse unless you want a full-blown riot on your hands.
Fair enough.
Okay. Jeffrey?
Yeah, not going to promise a full-blown riot, but I didn't really hear an answer on the equity question, and so rather than asking the question again, I'll give a couple recommendations. We've seen with VTA as it's planning the rest of the downtown stations that they're ahead of even, I think, Dearden in looking at displacement, doing a displacement study, and so I would encourage the partners in the DISC to review that, and then hopefully the the study that the housing department's going to be doing here in Dearden. But the one way that I think the station can address displacement that's different than, say, Little Portugal or East Santa Clara stations, the inclusion of concessions and retail, I think gives an opportunity to look at as we create a joint whatever the governing authority is for the station, looking at a living wage policy that ensures folks have the kind of wages that they can afford to continue living in this valley, and hopefully be able to have a labor peace and be able to have a voice at work. And as we look at the construction of this entity, because it will probably be some kind of a joint powers authority or other governance structure, consider whether or not we need a project labor agreement for a project of this size. Thank you.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Okay. Thank you, Jeffrey. We have a couple of minutes. I want to sort of open it up to see if anyone not just has questions, but sort of comments on anything that you saw, any of the sort of the vertical platform positions, and whether there was, you know, one that kind of jumped out, anything about the alignments that people want to comment on. We have about 5 minutes. So just before we move on, I think if there's comments, and let's try and be quick so everyone can get a chance. Bill, why don't you go first?
One of the things that comes up often is parking, and even Mayor Liccardo was saying we want to design around people, not cars. Is there any strategy to just move parking outside of the core, perhaps supporting even SAP Center in a way that you could use some of your transit to take care of that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think we're going to follow the lead of the city relative to the DSAP as well as the district parking study that they're going to do. I think that we need to kind of follow that process so that we're appropriately looking at it. Right now, we'll have some ability to look at where we could put parking, but we recognize there's a larger kind of policy effort happening with the city, so we'll follow their lead on exploring what makes sense relative to that kind of question.
Okay. Jim? Want to go next?
Area plan is to ensure the continued vitality of the San Jose Arena. We're concerned that the options 2 and 3 shown tonight would do just the opposite. They would jeopardize the future of the San Jose Arena and all of its events. So we're very concerned about the impacts of those schemes as shown tonight. Now we realize it's an evolving process. They may change or be refined, but from what we've seen, we'd be very concerned about that.
Okay. Have you had a chance to sit down, or is that something to do in the next month to walk through the options? Okay. All right. Harvey. Line here.
So what is the impact of the change of height limits of buildings in the immediate Diridon area, and how would that mask and hide any elevated platforms that we'd create? Because I think we've really increased the height limits in that area.
We did. That's a good question. And I wish I'm not the architect. Martin's not the architect. We need to probably put that in front of our architects and explore that a little bit. There's something there.
We're likely to have very high buildings in that
Right,
area.
Right, yeah.
Which would be bigger shadow than a 20-foot.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's a good thing to keep digging in on, especially because one of the comments that came out of this group, as well as out of a lot of the community engagement, was to have a signature building.
Right.
And if it's surrounded by tall buildings, you might not actually, signature building might be a little more difficult. Okay.
Kathy Sutherland, Delmas Park. One of the things that I'm wondering about too is the impact of all the ride sharing and all of the traffic that goes along with it, because I think everybody's heard about the experience that San Francisco's having. Oh, is it not? I'm sorry. So it's the impact of the traffic of the ride sharing and the gridlock, because everybody's heard about what's going on in San Francisco with their streets being constantly circled by these cars that are just picking up people and delivering. And so how will that impact the neighborhoods adjacent to the station if we're going to be encouraging and providing a lot of access for ride sharing?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something we need to explore vis-a-vis an access, more robust access planning process once we sort of figure out how we want that to work at the station. I think there's more technical work to be done on exactly that question on impacts. And I think that those layouts have different trade-offs relative to where the ride share is located. You know, that could affect how things move and disperse away from the station.
Okay, Jeffrey?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, all right. So we have, is there anyone who hasn't had a chance to ask a question or give a comment who wants to reflect at this time and give some ideas? If not, we can, anyone? Anyone who wants to say it again? I know this is a lot of information to take in. I'd encourage everyone to go back and look again through the PowerPoint and through the details of this.
And if I can just,
Yeah.
I will reflect, this felt really fast for me as a presenter. I wish we could spend a little bit more time digging in on this with you. So I think if you have additional questions or want more information, certainly reach out to Lori and we can explore. And there's a community meeting coming up. No, that's another time commitment, but it's an opportunity to sit with us and spend a little more time too. So thank you for indulging the fast talking.
Right. Thank you, and thanks to Liz and Martin. That was a lot of questions. Oh, wait, one more.
Just one thing. I would like to have you come out and make a presentation to Gardner and North Willow Glen and possibly Kathy's neighborhood as well, Delmas Park, maybe jointly.
Sure.
Okay?
You bet.
Sorry, you made the comment about the signature building. Stephen McMahon with the San Jose Unified School District. And I just noticed, we talk about housing all the time. Have you considered integrating an urban village on the rail properties? I mean, could you get a signature building that's a massive train hub with a residential tower and it's truly an urban village because you can go downstairs and get on the train?
Okay, we're going to take that as a comment to respond to later. Explore. Okay, so yes, they'll look into that. All right, so we're going to move on to public comment. Liz, Martin, thank you. I know that was a lot of information, a lot of questions, so appreciate your time. Dave, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right, so we have 5 cards that we received. We're going to start with Tessa Woodmansey. Sure.
Good.
And just as a
Here I
reminder,
am,
we do have a...
Live. All right, so I'm here tonight to talk about the elephant in the closet. It's called climate change. And it's coming, okay? It's coming. It's coming in 6 years. Let's talk about maybe 12 years before irreversible destruction on our planet. That's what's on the agenda. Climate change, okay? And you guys are not looking at it, okay? That's why we're in the world of hurt that we're in. That's why the youth say we can't talk to politicians because they have caused the problem. And so what we need to do is something very different so that we don't go extinct, okay? That's what we're dealing with right now, climate change. And it's 6 years that we have to reduce 60%, okay? So I'll give you a little hint because my husband is a master biologist. He's going to tell us what 60% looks like because that's what the IPCC says we have to do, is reduce drastically 60% in the next 12 years. That's 5%. And economic development is going to decline because only thing that has caused economic growth is fossil fuels. And we have to stop using fossil fuels, okay? That's why I'm here to tell you that. We have 12 years. We will have 5% reduction every year from now on. My husband says 5% is a depression. We will have 12 depressions on top of each other, okay? And that's what we need to do to reduce our fossil fuel use to make a livable planet. Maybe. We don't even think we're going to have it. It's gone, okay? We have lost our natural habitat, and we can't fuel through fossil fuels the artificial habitat that we've developed. So we need to change, okay? So we're talking about 60%. What my husband says as a master biologist, what that means is no cars, no airplanes, because we don't have wings. We don't have wings. Oh, there's my I have to stop talking. No, I would like to keep talking. I don't know what that sound was. Anyway, what? Oh, okay, can I have another minute? Okay, so what I'm saying is that one, that under a climate emergency, we have to fix Stockton Avenue, and that is a group that I'd like you to come, because we are starting a new neighborhood association called Fix Stockton Avenue. We need to not have BART go to Santa Clara. We need to make BART stop at Diridon. And these are very important things, and we need you to come to our neighborhood association, Fix Stockton Avenue, save the world, save ourselves.
Okay, we have Adina Levin, followed by Blair Beekman. Do you want to pop up here, Adina, if that's okay? Thank you.
Good evening. Adina Levin with Friends of Caltrain. Thank you so much for this very rich presentation talking about a bunch of options. Two things to think about. One is it seems like these different options have very different implications for the active transportation through the area, walking and biking, and for transfers in between all the different modes. There was a study that was done a couple of years ago for the station area showing that there may be as many transfers among the transit modes in 2040 than there is transit use today. So the options that have the best transit transfers are likely to do the best at getting more transit use, getting more cars off the road, and helping to save the planet. So I would urge that to be considered. And then point number two is in this phase of the Diridon Station and the Diridon Station area plan is probably looking at internal circulation in the area, especially with walking and biking and scooters and other non-car modes. Would encourage you to look as you move forward with what they did for LA Union Station, is to look not only at the immediate station access, but look at the 1 to 2 mile bike shed and look at where the barriers are so people can get to the station without driving and get more cars off the road. So if that can be included in a phase, that would be really helpful in order to be able to achieve the city's vision of less driving and save the planet. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Adina. Next up is Blair, followed by Roland.
Hi, thank you for this meeting today. Both speakers have spoken about, there was a meeting about at the VTA last Friday, May 17th, that talked sort of about the same issues. I recommend to review it. It's important, and it was mentioned by, at that meeting, Santa Clara Board of Supervisors Cindy Chavez, you know, just in polite terms that in developing the station ideas that you learn to develop different modes of transportation around the station that, you know, it's important at this time, and that our emphasis should not be so much on automobiles and its use of fuel, petroleum fuel or fossil fuel, and that, you know, we're really at the time to think about different means of transportation. And it's exciting, it's hopeful, and it's interesting that San Jose is so dedicated to such a process. A few other items I wanted to mention. I hope that in talking about the high-speed rail, you know, we're talking about design here. All designs, I hope, are available for all options in the future. And we can just simply be open, however it is, to talk about high-speed rail. It doesn't have to be a closed subject. I hope that we can talk about the different uses of mixed income housing. I think that's become an interesting topic here in San Jose that we're developing amazingly well, that I hope we can talk about more. And that workers' rights and that working, you know, how to establish work standards in San Jose. For all of San Jose, the culture of San Jose can be talked about more here at the Google process. And, you know, I wanted to respect the people who demonstrate here, and I hope you can too, and not feel fearful of them, and that we work for peace at this time as we're possibly heading towards war, don't be fooled by their pretty strong words right now. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Blair. Next is Roland, and the last speaker is Ed Rast.
So first of all, I'd like to thank Harvey for his egret plan, because I believe we should have a year-round egret season, and it's a plan that eliminates conflict between pedestrians and vehicular traffic. And I believe the only way to achieve this is to elevate the people's space above the street and the tracks, just like the Stratford City station in London and the brand new high-speed rail station in Hong Kong. I suggest you go in and Google it. That takes care of the buses, the taxis, and the ride shares. All the conflicts are gone. 72 up? Right. So Kathy brought this up. What happened? Oh, okay, on this one you still see the historical building. Maybe it's the next one over then. Because on every plan I've looked at, okay, boom, it's gone. Right, so you have to start at the station, and then the tracks, and then everything else. That station is not negotiable. If you want to understand what the expectation is, go to the Spur office and have a good old look at what the King's Cross station looks like. That's what the expectation is. Freight, if you want to elevate the tracks, for every foot that you elevate the tracks, you're going to elevate them for 100 feet either side. If you elevate them for 25 feet, you're going to have elevate them for 2,500 feet either side of the station. You're going to have a 1 mile barrier to downtown. How can you possibly elevate the light rail and go under the tracks? The light rail station, yeah, that one, you see the box? Needs to go in the same box as the concourse and BART, just like the station Market Street, San Francisco. And in closing, my advice to the ABC team is to get their house in order as soon as possible, because we have we got a new kid in town called Deutsche Bahn, the only train operator of the High Speed Rail Authority and the current operator of every single railway station in Germany. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. Final speaker is Ed Rast.
I've got a question for basically the city. How far basically down will the EIR impact go? Will it go down to Tamian Station or further south than that? The question, because what you're doing essentially on that is if you don't look at where the impact of it is, you're going to impact it later in the future. So in other words, what we're looking at is the idea of future proofing. And if you don't do that, you're going to basically wipe out probably the entire one side of Jerome in Gardner. The other side you need to take a look at is take a look at what's happening with VTA. Right now, the subsidy that the VTA has had is over $22 per person every time they go. Because what happens is right now we are subsidizing 90% of the operating cost of VTA is subsidized by the taxpayers. At some point in time, the taxpayers are going to say, we don't want to do this anymore. And so therefore, you ought to take a look at what is going to happen with VTA in the future. Because right now, it's split between on the light rail side and buses and also road maintenance. So there's an idea you ought to take a look at on why are they going to continue at some point. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Our final comment is from Alina Yin.
Hi there. I had a suggestion for a community engagement, a different kind of forum. And my suggestion, the genesis for this is that I think it needs to be, the information tonight was very dense. And if you haven't read all the reports, it's really hard to follow. And it's not very, the information is not easily accessible or democratized for a lot of people who don't have the vernacular to understand this. And so a suggestion I had was if we could maybe host a meeting at the San Jose Improv. They are available Monday through Wednesday, and they can accommodate around 300 to 400 people, I believe. And also, too, would be able to partner with maybe a local improv or comedian to work with the presenters to help to condense, rewrite, translate the information to make it more easily digestible, and at the very least in English and in Spanish. So if it was a 2-night event, it could be one could be in English, one could be in Spanish. And there can be a live audience participation via, there's an app called Kahoot, and you can do live surveys where it projects on the screen, and you can ask questions like, what is the preferred transportation mode for 10 years from now for millennials? Like, what do we want to be doing? Do we want more VTA or do we want more Caltrain or better bike lanes? And then there can also be a live streaming aspect, and the feedback and the survey can be expanded even more through those channels. And also, in making the suggestion, I don't think it's fair to just lay it all on one person. So I would ask that it should be a team effort, and if there is anybody at SAG and this committee who are willing to help Lori kind of put together this community meeting, or just brainstorm different styles of community meetings.
Great, thank you very much. We love the creative thought, and we definitely took all that note down. So I'm going to hand it back over to Lori to walk us through the next steps.
So the next few meetings for the advisory group, these are the tentative topics and tentative timing. We'll try to get these on your calendars as soon as possible so you can plan around it. I know July particularly is a rough month. But we will plan to provide updates on Google's mixed-use plan at both July and September. They already gave you an indication of what they're hoping to show at those times. We're also planning to provide an update on that citywide anti-displacement strategy at the next meeting, and then come back in September for the fourth round of concept plan outreach, where we'll continue to refine these layouts and come back with you at that time. And then November, the intention is to have a kickoff round for the DSAP amendment and Google project review process. So with that, since it's past 9, I'm going to adjourn at 9:03, and so let me know if you have any follow-up questions. Thank you, everyone.